Purdue's top target in 2026 is committing later this week. Will the Boilermakers land Sinan Huan?
You are Locked On Boilermakers, your daily podcast on the Purdue Boilermakers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Locked On Boilermakers here on the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network. Thank you for joining me today. I am your host. I am Nick Arvin, and we have an exciting Tuesday episode of Locked On Boilermakers coming your way today. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 and bonus bets to use across the app. Download the FanDuel app today. Like I said, it's an exciting episode of Locked On Boilermakers today because Joe Tipton of the One Sports Network put out a tweet. He announced that Sinan Huan, we've been talking about this 7-footer all recruiting cycle long. He is officially down to 3 schools. He's down to Purdue, Illinois, and Ohio State, and he will be making his decision this week. So that's what we're going to talk about to start the show. Will Purdue land this guy? What to expect? What 3 teams are involved? We'll talk all that, everything surrounding Purdue's top target right now. Then we'll shift to the AP poll that came out today. Purdue fell. We'll talk about that, why, and then we'll end off the show taking a look at KenPom. Are Purdue the underdogs going into Tuscaloosa, and why? It's going to be a fun one. I hope that you guys really enjoy it, but I want to go ahead and jump right in. Let's talk about Sinan Huan, because earlier today when Joe Tipton announced that Huan would be making his announcement this week, I was pretty excited because this is a guy that has been traced back to Purdue since his initial visit. Purdue was the first school that Huan visited, followed up by Northwestern, then Illinois, and he finished up his visits a couple weeks back when he visited Ohio State. There were some conversations that Duke may be getting involved with Huan, which ultimately that didn't come to fruition because he announced his final 3 today as well. And those final 3 teams were Purdue, Illinois, and Ohio State. We definitely knew that Illinois and Purdue would be in that final group of teams that he would select from. Ohio State, they really came up strong, kind of to end his recruiting trip. Like I said, that was the last visit that Huan went on. But overall, everybody wants this guy, and they want him for a reason because he's a 7-footer with size, with a lot of development, possible for this guy. Definitely not a finished project. And we can talk about what his role would be if he does commit to Purdue, but you can't look past 7 foot. You can't look past a guy that can rim protect, that can develop as an interior defender, and then eventually get even better on the inside. Sinan Huan, he's not put together yet. When we look at a commitment, if he does end up committing to Purdue, it's not a guarantee, in my opinion, that he plays year 1 because he is an unfinished product, but he is a 4-star with tons of potential. Huan, he's an East Coast guy. He's a guy that comes from Chinese heritage. We know the Zach Edey thing where obviously, I'm not going to compare him or try to put him in the shoes of Zach Edey, but when you have that heritage, a 7-footer with that Chinese heritage, like what Edey had coming from Canada, it's a nice pitching point to Sinan Huan, and I think that's been one of the reasons, not to mention what Matt Painter has consistently done, being able to develop these huge centers over a course of time. I think that Huan fits that mold perfectly of what Purdue has traditionally done, what Matt Painter has traditionally done in terms of recruiting a 3 or a 4-star guy. Yes, Huan, he's a blue chip prospect, in my opinion. He is a 4-star, but he's not ready right now. But you don't need to be ready when you join a Matt Painter system because Matt Painter develops you. That's what he does better than anybody. And that's really the selling point to come to Purdue. And I think that Huan absolutely realizes that. I think that Purdue is number 1 in his opinion right now. But it really comes down to Purdue and Illinois, in my opinion. Like I said, Ohio State made a late push, but the fits at Purdue, the fit at Illinois, that just can't be talked enough about. Brad Underwood, with all the international guys he brings in, obviously Huan in America, but that Chinese heritage 7-footer, you could see why that Illinois connection has certainly gotten hot in the past couple weeks. There certainly is some interest there from Huan. He's talked very high about Illinois. He said that he enjoys Brad Underwood, has a lot of faith in that coaching staff over there, but he's also spoken very high on Purdue. And we did an episode where after the Ohio State visit, Matt Painter and the Boilermakers made one kind of final push for Huan. They really like this guy. He is Purdue's number one target right now as this 2026 recruiting cycle starts to simmer down a little bit, kind of getting to the end of this class. Huan is one of the final guys there where you look at him and if you're able to get him, that is a real game changer for this program. It's a real game changer for 2026. If you take a little bit of a look at what that class has right now, you got plenty of guards. And Luke Ertl, you have Jacob Weber, very talented. Those guys are going to be huge at Purdue for years to come. You also have Rivers Knight, who is going to be a good, very underrated power forward in this class. The opportunity to bring in a 7-footer in Huan, that really completes this class, in my opinion. That's the one spot where you're kind of missing that you would really love to fill with a guy like Oscar Clough leaving next year. I think that Purdue is definitely in this mix for Huan. I think that they are the favorites right now. Illinois is certainly up there, but I do think that the fit that Purdue presents, it's one of the most underrated fits of anybody in this recruiting class. I think that Huan could step into Purdue and fit in perfectly. Whether that's what he wants to do, that decision is going to be made this week. So we're not going to have to wait long, but say he does pick Purdue. What does that mean for Huan? What does that mean for his development? Well, I brought up that he may not necessarily be the most complete prospect, and that's very true, but that length, that shot blocking, all things that you can develop I don't know whether you're going to get a red shirt from him if he does commit next year, but I think having Daniel Jacobson as that starting center and then maybe a Raleigh Burgess who you can fill in at that backup spot next year after redshirting this year. There are options that you can certainly work around. However, like I said, I think that Huan would absolutely be an amazing commitment. I think it would be one of the biggest commitments of all of this class, regardless of ranking, regardless of team, because that's just the amazing fit that Sinan Huan would present for this Boilermakers team, for this coaching staff. I really think that they can do wonders for him, his development, and ultimately, we are not going to have to wait long. The decision is going to be made this week. Sinan Huan, he is down to 3 teams: Purdue, Ohio State, and Illinois. The final thing that I do want to mention in terms of Huan, in terms of what he can be, when we talk about centers, a lot of times, you talk about centers, what the modern center is, whether you can stretch out the floor, whether you can shoot the ball. Traditionally, centers, you weren't asking guys like that at 7 foot to shoot the ball. But now we know you can even see it with Daniel Jacobson, where Jacobson at 7'4", he's not scared to shoot the ball. That's just kind of where that specific type of player is developing. And we talk about how Huan, he's not fully developed yet. There's a ton of potential in terms of his interior defense, even the interior offense. I think that this guy might be able to develop a shot. I don't know for sure, but under Matt Painter, I definitely think that the opportunity for Huan to develop a shot, it's there. And the opportunity for a 7-footer to space the floor, especially backing up Daniel Jacobson, the opportunity to have multiple 7-footers going into the future for this program, Sinan Huan would put Purdue in a really good spot, would really secure the front court going into the future. So many different assets that this guy provides you. This week, you give your final pitch, you get your final push for Sinan Huan. Matt Painter knows it. He knows how valuable this guy is. Everybody knows. All 3 of these programs know how valuable Huan is, and it's going to be a big commitment no matter where he goes. But Purdue definitely in prime position to land Sinan Huan. As soon as he commits, we're going to make sure that we put out a video recapping his decision. So stick with us, but stay with us here for this next segment where the AP poll came out today. Purdue actually dropped from their number one spot. Find out how far and what that means for the Boilermakers here next on Locked On Boilermakers. College football is back, and I couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands. There's just nothing like it. But let's be real. Actually getting tickets can feel more like a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, and prices jumping at the checkout. That's why I use Gametime, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices. With no surprise fees, what you see is what you pay. I love using Gametime because I can get to Ross-Ade, I can get to Mackey for a fairly affordable cost. It's one of the easiest ticket apps to use, and that's why I love them, and you should love them too. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket. Go download Gametime today. When the preseason AP poll came out and Purdue came in at number one, there were a lot of conversations whether the Boilermakers deserved it over Houston and Florida, who were in the national championship last year. That was certainly a topic of debate. And from Purdue fans, a little bit of a mixture of emotions in terms of a lot of people, including myself, were very excited because Purdue has never held that preseason number one ranking before. So a bit of a historic moment for the Boilermakers. But then there was another group of people that kind of felt like there was not a chip where you start out number one. That's a lot of pressure to maintain throughout the course of the season. And so there was a bit of a mixture in opinions on whether Purdue being ranked number one was a good thing or a bad thing. But the one thing that you can't argue is that it certainly does matter. Yes, I don't think that the AP poll is the best method of doing things, of the best method of ranking teams. That is my opinion on it. That's just how I feel. I think that's in both sports, football and basketball. I think it's a flawed method. However, it's what we have, and it is still relevant in this sport into determining where teams are, a little bit less so than football, because when you think about March, a lot of that is analytic based off KenPom, based off different quad 1, quad 2 wins, a lot of different analytics. So the AP poll, certainly important, but it doesn't hold as much weight as football because the playoffs, they aren't really set by that. But still, it does matter in terms of figuring out where the mainstream's at in terms of the opinion that certain people have about your team. And Purdue, they started out number one. After the first week of games, Evansville and Oakland, Purdue actually falls down to number two in the AP poll. And I want to give my opinion on it. And my opinion is that I completely disagree. I don't think that Purdue should have fallen, and I don't think that they should have fallen to Houston. And let me tell you why. Had Houston been ranked number one preseason, I would have been okay with that. I think that Houston is a very talented team this year behind Kelvin Sampson. I think that they are gritty, have a really, obviously Houston always has a defensive identity because that's in the culture there. But this year, even more so maybe than the team that we played last year in the Sweet 16. So I'm not doubting Houston, what they can be. However, Houston's victory over the weekend wasn't necessarily impressive. They were kind of down to the wire in that one, not against a great opponent. And so you look at what Purdue was doing, and they were in a bit of a battle themselves against Oakland. So my question is, why is Purdue being judged a little bit harder for playing Oakland close, but Houston isn't being judged for playing close? Well, realistically, it comes down to the fact that Houston played on Sunday, Purdue played on Friday. And when you look at who's voting on this thing, it's beat writers. It's people that focus on just their team. They're not watching other teams in the nation. And when you think about Houston playing on the Sunday, I hate to say it, but a lot of people were watching NFL football on Sunday. Not a whole lot of people were watching the Houston Cougars, and I don't know if the voters were watching Houston play because Houston wasn't impressive in my opinion. I thought they played good. I think that Houston is going to be a good team, but they didn't play good enough, in my opinion, to jump Purdue in the polls. That didn't make much sense to me. And like I said, it doesn't really matter the jump from 1 to 2 because Purdue, they're going to play Alabama, which now is a top 10 matchup because Alabama jumps up to number 8 in the AP poll. So absolutely, if Purdue beats Alabama, that win is going to matter more than Houston potentially beating Auburn this week. I see no way that Purdue isn't number 1 this time next week if they take care of business in Tuscaloosa. So this really doesn't matter. However, I do think it's unfair that we're overreacting to these 2 Purdue games. And that's really my main takeaway. Not that Purdue falls to number 2, not that they can't earn it back, but that people are overreacting to a game played against Oakland where Purdue didn't have one of their top players, a potential All-American, in Trey Kaufman-Renn. He wasn't playing. So it's not fair to properly judge Purdue off 2 games, which they did win. Yes, they didn't play their best basketball, but nor did Houston. So it's not fair for them to jump. When you play Towson and you're only winning by 5 under 10 minutes, yes, they pull away at the end to win by 17, but that's no more of an impressive victory than Purdue beating Oakland by 10 and being tied at halftime. It really just isn't. So it didn't make sense to me, but it could be a good thing to a certain perspective for Purdue. Not being ranked number 1, especially going into Alabama, I think it takes a little bit of pressure off of you, not a ton, because that game is still going to have a ton of anticipation behind it. That environment and Coleman is going to be absolutely electric. However, I do think it takes a little bit of pressure on you, and I think it puts a chip on your shoulder. I talked about how you can earn it back this week. I think that's certainly in the minds of the players. I think that if Matt Painter, if I think what he's going to do is correct, is that he'll use this to motivate his team going into Alabama. Yeah, the AP voters, they don't think you're the number 1 team in the nation. They think that Houston is better than you. Well, you have the opportunity to prove it against the number 8 team in the nation this week that you are the number 1 team. So I think that it's certainly something that could be used as a motivational tool. Overall, if you're Purdue, you just got to earn it back. That's really what it comes down to. Yes, the AP system is flawed. Yes, Houston in all likelihood should not have jumped Purdue in this scenario, but you have an opportunity to get it back. Use it as motivation. Don't use it as a way to be disrespected, but use it as a way to fuel yourself towards victory. I think that this Purdue team is capable of doing that, and I think that they'll be ready. I think that they're going to play much better basketball heading into Thursday as the number 2 team in the nation than they did as the number 1 team in the nation, playing those 2 games against Evansville and Oakland early. This team has yet to hit their stride. They're yet to hit their potential. There's still certainly different guys, new guys that are trying to get together, learn some chemistry between this team. So if the voters say that this is the number 2 team in the nation, so be it. But I promise you, this Purdue team is not done growing. And if they're number 2 right now, they certainly have a lot of room to grow, get better. And it's hard to say that this Purdue team is not going to be the number 1 team in the nation when they're done with this year. However, a lot to be proven on Thursday. So let's get done with that game. Let's see how Purdue competes against Alabama, and then we'll revisit this conversation about where Purdue stands, if they're the number 1 team in the nation, where they stack up against Houston. None of it really matters until you start playing competition. Purdue gets that test on Thursday, and a lot of these questions will be answered. But a question that we did have was the mentality of Purdue. Do they use this and fuel themselves as maybe an underdog? A lot of people are taking Alabama to win on Thursday, and with Purdue probably entering that as a money line underdog, is that mentality with the Boilermakers? We're going to have that next, and we're going to talk about that mentality and take a look at KenPom as the Boilermakers head into their first test of the season. Stick with us. That's here next on Locked On Boilermakers. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head on over to FanDuel.com and sign up to play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to Locked On Boilermakers. If you've made it this far, I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all of you guys for helping to make Locked On the number one sports podcast network. In this last segment, I want to talk a little bit more, go a little bit more in depth on something I brought up in the previous segment. It comes back to teams maybe underrated, or maybe the media underrating Purdue right now. Yes, they played 2 games to start out the year. Maybe they didn't play their best, but they were without one of their best players, someone that is pretty important to the identity of this Purdue team, that guy being Trey Kaufman-Renn. So I want to look a little bit more before we end off today's episode into Purdue, whether they have that underdog mentality, what KenPom can tell us, and whether that'll have any effect on Thursday's game against Alabama. So the first thing I want to throw out is ESPN. Obviously, the ESPN predictor isn't the best, but right now, we don't have the lines out quite yet with our friends at FanDuel. So that's kind of what we're going to have to look at to interpret where Purdue might be going into Alabama, what that line might open up as. And Purdue, they were a favorite to beat this Alabama team up until about Friday, where after Friday and after Alabama got that win on Saturday against St. John's, the odds completely flipped. Now Alabama a 60% chance via ESPN to beat the Boilermakers. So you can tell how that's kind of flipped. And with that, the mentality, in my opinion, of the Boilermakers has flipped, because now you're traveling into Coleman. You're traveling in as the quote-unquote underdog, although you are ranked the number 2 team in the nation. And I do believe that that's going to have some effect towards the intensity that Purdue is going to play with. I do believe that will, in result, factor into a more complete Purdue team that's going to play a little bit harder, have a bit of a chip on their shoulder compared to the first 2 games of the year against maybe an Evansville or an Oakland, where you don't have that fire to win. I'm not saying that Purdue should have played that way. However, it did look like they played that way against Oakland. Like they didn't have that fire. Like they kind of thought they had it in the bag before that game started up. Against Alabama, I think completely different team, completely different approach to how Purdue comes into this game, to the way that they treat Alabama, not just as a competitor, but viewing them as maybe this team is projected to win. We're the underdogs. We're the hunted. That's a mentality shift that can really be beneficial for a team, especially going into a road environment. So that's something to factor in that I think we can look at. Just give something to look at in terms of the approach Purdue brings in and the intensity that they play with going into Coleman on Thursday. I think that that underdog mentality is going to be more of a factor than we think. But if we look on KenPom is something that I bring up quite a lot because it gives you a good read, although not perfect, a lot like the AP poll. It's one of the better methods into determining how good teams are, especially for college basketball. Analytically, the mathematical formula, I don't exactly understand completely, but it takes your overall offensive net rating and your defensive net rating, and then it gets the average of those, and that's what makes you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, et cetera, et cetera. So Purdue, they started out the year number 2 under Houston, I believe. And it was really because they had a defense that was projected to be in the 20s and their offense was number 1. After Evansville, Purdue had a good showing. They moved up to number 1 in KenPom, but Oakland was the one that Purdue struggled with. And after that, they dropped. That's what I want to talk about because Purdue dropped in KenPom rankings from number 1 to number 7. The number 1 offense is still Purdue's. However, what you got to look at is that defensive rating. Purdue is ranked number 42 in defense. The next team that's ranked high in the top 25 with a lower defensive rating is Vanderbilt at number 15. They have the number 5 offense, the number 44 defense. So it's pretty evident right now that KenPom doesn't think that Purdue has a great defense. Really, that's what's going to be important for Purdue, is fixing some of those issues defensively. A lot of that comes back to rebounding, but a lot of that is just getting on your man, attaching to your man. And a lot of it also comes back to having new guys that are still trying to mesh together, get on the same page defensively. So it's certainly going to come. I'm not trying to overreact too much into where this team is defensively, but KenPom shows a pretty good example of how Purdue, still the number 1 team offensively, still has that firepower, and I don't think that anybody is going to deny that. But in order to get to where this Purdue team wants to go this year, in order to get to kind of the ceiling that Matt Painter and this team sees themselves having, they got to get better on defense. That's going to be something for Purdue that I think is going to be a huge battle through a lot of points this year, is just getting that defense solid, getting the defense on the floor that's going to be the best in the best moments, because you don't have to have the same guys on the floor all the time. We know that CJ Cox, he's great at attaching to other teams' number 1 guard defensively because he's an amazing point of attack defender. I'm sure that we're going to see him on Phylon against Alabama. There's so many different matchups that are yet to be discovered this year for Purdue. I don't think that we need to worry too much about where this team is defensively quite yet. Now, if things take a turn for the worse, I'd say if we face off against Alabama and that tied backcourt is just cutting you open, well, that's when we have a concern. That's when we look at the drawing board and say, what needs to change for this Purdue team where they can achieve their goals, where the KenPom will show and reflect that the defense has gotten better. Right now, we're not there, but we are 2 games into the season. So I think for Purdue this year, the expectations were so high. And for good reason. That's not just from the fans. That's for the players, the coaches, everybody. Everybody around Purdue has set the expectations in the sky. And Purdue, they've won 2 games in a row, although not pretty. I feel like sometimes those expectations are too high for where this team necessarily is. I think that as fans, we just need to have a lot of patience with this Purdue team. Have patience that this team is going to develop, continue to get better, and there's no doubt in my mind that they are going to get there. But patience is going to be incredibly important for this team this year because you have your 3 seniors, but you also have a lot of new guys playing new roles. You got Daniel Jacobson, who wasn't here. Oscar Clough, who wasn't here. You've got TK coming back from injury. You got CJ and Jakari Harris trying to get that sorted out. A lot of different guys. Meyer, who's brought in. It's going to get worked out. Defensively, this team will get better as the year goes on. I'm not worried about it, but what I am worried about is whether this team will be ready going into Alabama. As we stand right now, I think with a healthy TKR, this team will be ready. I think that KenPom number is not going to stay at 7 for long because I do think the Boilermakers will come in to Tuscaloosa on Thursday and get it done against the Tide. Whether they use that underdog mentality to kind of fuel them a little bit, whether they have a chip on their shoulder, that's going to be determined. Definitely something to look out for on Thursday, though. I expect us to see a Purdue team playing with a ton of energy on the road. And if they're able to do that, I don't think that many teams are going to be able to beat Purdue this year. I appreciate you guys joining us for another episode of Locked On Boilermakers. Thank you guys for making Locked On Boilermakers your first listen today. For your second listen, considering check out Locked On Big 10. Craig Sheeman breaks down the most exciting conference in college sports, from the rivalries to the championships and every game in between. Find Locked On Big 10 on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Of course, it's your team every day. Thank you guys once again. If you guys are just now seeing us, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. It helps out a ton as we want to continue to bring you guys daily Boilermakers content. Thank you guys. And as always, boiler up, hammer down.